Let's go Dolphins! I honestly didn't expect to see this. Because after everything the Miami Dolphins went through this offseason, I thought national analysts would remain skeptical about the direction of this franchise. Instead, one of the biggest sports networks in the world just gave Miami one of the highest offseason grades in the entire NFL. And trust me, that changes the conversation. For months, Dolphins fans have debated every major move. The coaching change, the front office change, the decision to completely reset the roster, the signing of Malik Willis, the trades, the departures. Some people loved the direction. Others questioned whether Miami had taken too many risks. Now an outside evaluation has added another perspective to the debate. According to ESPN's offseason grades, the Dolphins received an A-, making them one of only a handful of teams to receive one of the highest marks in the league. Honestly, I don't think many fans expected that. And here's what really caught my attention. It wasn't simply the grade itself. It was the reasoning behind it. Because while ESPN praised one specific move, it also pointed out one area where Miami may still have work to do before the season begins. So this isn't blind optimism. It's a balanced evaluation. One that recognizes both the progress the Dolphins have made and the challenges that still remain. That immediately raises an interesting question. Are the Dolphins actually further ahead in this rebuild than many people realize? Or is this offseason grade giving fans expectations that will now have to be proven once training camp begins? That's the conversation we need to have today. Before we continue, make sure you've already hit that like button if you're excited to see the Dolphins finally begin training camp later this month. And today I want to hear from the most optimistic Dolphins fans watching. Comment below. Go Dolphins! The rebuild is moving forward. Let's see how many fans believe this organization is heading in the right direction. Now, my opinion is simple. Offseason grades don't win football games. They don't guarantee playoff appearances. And they certainly don't determine what happens once the regular season begins. But they do tell us something important. They reveal how people around the league are viewing the direction of this franchise. And in this case, the evaluation suggests that many of the Dolphins' biggest offseason decisions are earning respect outside of Miami. According to the evaluation, the move that stood above all the others was Miami's decision to sign Malik Willis. The report argues that bringing Willis to Miami made a great deal of sense for a team beginning a new chapter. It also acknowledged that the move carries risk, pointing to his limited opportunities earlier in his career, while at the same time highlighting how impressive his performances were in Green Bay. That combination of upside and uncertainty is exactly why the signing has generated so much discussion. The report even suggests that finding franchise quarterbacks through free agency is extremely uncommon. But it argues that Willis's flashes of high-level play made him worth betting on despite the obvious questions that still surround him. That's a significant statement. Because quarterback is the most important position in football. And if this decision works, it changes the entire direction of the Dolphins moving forward. But the praise didn't stop there. The report also discussed Miami's willingness to fully embrace a rebuild. Instead of trying to patch problems with short-term solutions, the Dolphins appear committed to building with a long-term vision. That intentional approach was specifically mentioned as one of the biggest reasons the organization earned such a high grade. However, the evaluation wasn't perfect. Because while ESPN liked the overall direction, it also identified one concern that could become extremely important once the season begins. And honestly, that concern may end up becoming the biggest storyline surrounding this offense over the next few months. Now let's talk about the one criticism ESPN included in its evaluation. Because while the Dolphins received one of the highest offseason grades in the league, the report made it clear that the roster still has one noticeable weakness. The supporting cast around Malik Willis. According to the evaluation, Miami's current group of pass catchers leaves plenty of questions entering training camp. The report specifically points to the wide receiver room as being remarkably thin following the major roster changes this offseason. When you look at the current group, you begin to understand why that concern was raised. Malik Washington, Jaylen Tolbert, Tutu Atwell, Chris Bell, Caleb Douglas, Kevin Coleman Jr. Those are the names expected to compete for opportunities after the offseason overhaul. The evaluation argues that having another proven playmaker could have helped accelerate Malik Willis's development. However, it also explains why Miami chose a different path. Instead of holding on to Jaylen Waddle, the Dolphins accepted what the report describes as a return that was simply too valuable to pass up. That decision clearly reflects the organization's long-term approach rather than focusing only on immediate results. Another important point mentioned in the evaluation involves Devon Achane. While the Dolphins moved on from several offensive playmakers, they chose to keep a chain and reward him with a contract extension. According to the report, pairing Malik Willis with a chain could become one of the foundations of Miami's offense over the next several seasons. That wasn't viewed as just another contract. It was viewed as a commitment to building around players the organization believes can remain part of its future. The report also points toward Miami's financial flexibility moving forward. Rather than aggressively filling every remaining hole this offseason, it notes that the Dolphins are positioned with significant salary cap space in the future. That creates options. Maybe the organization chooses to remain patient. Maybe it waits for the right opportunity instead of forcing expensive signings today. The evaluation suggests that strategy is consistent with the deliberate rebuild Miami appears to be pursuing. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from this entire discussion. This offseason wasn't about making the loudest moves. It was about making intentional ones. Every major decision seems connected to a larger plan. Whether fans agree with every move or not, it's difficult to ignore the consistency behind the approach. That's exactly why ESPN's evaluation stood out. The report isn't praising Miami simply because of one signing. It's recognizing the overall direction of the organization, even while acknowledging that certain areas of the roster still need improvement. But here's where things become really interesting. Because once training camp begins, none of these grades will matter anymore. The conversations about roster construction, the debates about offseason strategy, the praise from analysts, all of that disappears the moment players step onto the practice field. From that point forward, only performance matters. And that's where Malik Willis becomes the center of everything. If he validates the confidence the organization showed by bringing him in, if the young receivers develop faster than expected, if this offense grows together, then people may look back at this A- grade and say it was fully deserved. But if those questions at wide receiver become bigger problems than expected, this positive offseason evaluation will quickly be forgotten. That's why the next few months are so important. The Dolphins have earned praise for the direction of their rebuild. And that's exactly why I don't think Dolphins fans should get too caught up in the actual letter grade. Whether it's an A-, A, B, or even a C, none of those grades will decide how many games Miami wins this season. What matters is whether the decisions behind that grade prove to be the right ones. Because if you really look at everything ESPN highlighted, it all comes back to one central idea. The Dolphins have chosen a clear direction. This wasn't an offseason built around chasing the biggest names available. It wasn't about making splash moves simply to dominate headlines. According to the evaluation, Miami has been very intentional about the way it's rebuilding this football team. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest reasons the organization earned so much respect from the report. One detail that stood out to me was the acknowledgement that Miami still had the financial flexibility to add veterans at several different positions. The report mentions wide receiver, edge rusher, tight end, cornerback, and safety as areas where the Dolphins could have chosen to spend more aggressively. Instead, the organization largely stayed disciplined. Rather than filling every perceived weakness immediately, the front office appears comfortable allowing this roster to continue developing while maintaining future flexibility. That isn't always the most exciting approach for fans, but it is the approach ESPN recognized through